This is an analysis from Alpha Business Media. Now, if you've been following the news out of Nepal, you've probably seen the headlines. They've been absolutely glowing, painting this picture of unprecedented success. It really seems like a new era of energy surplus has dawned for a country that's long been defined by power shortages. But behind all that celebration, there's a critical question we need to ask.
And the source of all this excitement really boils down to a single number, 1,100 megawatts. That's how much electricity Nepal is now exporting to India. It's a huge leap, no question about it. And on the surface, it really does feel like a moment of arrival.
But for any serious investor, celebrating right now would be, well, premature. Because hidden behind those record-breaking export numbers is a really dangerous structural flaw. It's a paradox where Nepal is selling more power than ever before, yet has almost no control over the price it gets.
So, let's peel back the layers on this success story, because when you look closer, you'll see it's built on a foundation that's a lot more fragile than it appears. It's really a classic case of a hidden vulnerability that's being masked by an impressive headline number.
And here's the crucial point. Celebrating export volume is focusing on a vanity metric. It looks good, but it doesn't tell the whole story. The real story is that Nepal is a price taker, not a price maker. They're supplying a product into a massive market without any power to influence what that market is willing to pay.
This quote from the source material just illustrates the problem perfectly. It's the classic single buyer risk. I mean, imagine building a world-class factory only to realize there's just one customer at the gate, and they get to decide what they'll pay you each and every day. That's the exact position Nepal is in right now.
To really get why this is happening, we need to throw out the simple idea that Nepal is just selling power to India. The reality is so much more complex and, frankly, a lot more dangerous for Nepal. This isn't a straightforward sale. It's more like being a player in a relentless, high-speed auction.
You see, Nepal sells its power on the Indian Energy Exchange, the IEX. This is not some long-term contract with a nice, stable price. No, it's a day-ahead spot market where buyers and sellers place bids, and the price can swing wildly every 15 minutes based on supply and demand across the entire Indian subcontinent.
And here's the real kicker. Nepal's own geography actually works against it in this system. Most of its hydropower projects are run-of-river, which is a fancy way of saying they can't store water. There's no big reservoir. So during the monsoon season, when the rivers are just raging, they have to generate power. They have no choice. This forces them to dump all of their supply onto the market at the exact same time India's own hydro and wind power is peaking. And you can guess what happens next. The market gets flooded, and prices just crash, sometimes down to nearly zero.
This comparison here just shows you the incredible imbalance in the market. While Nepalese producers are riding this roller coaster of IEX spot market prices, many of their Indian competitors have their revenue locked in with long-term, 25-year fixed-price contracts. So they have stability. Nepal gets volatility.
So the inescapable conclusion is this. With its relatively small volume, Nepal just can't influence the market price. It has to simply take whatever the gigantic Indian market decides to give it. It is, by definition, a price taker.
Okay, but the market mechanics are only half of the story. The other half is raw geopolitics. Because India's power in this relationship isn't just economic, it's literally built into the physical infrastructure and reinforced by strategic policy.
The right economic term for this whole situation is a monopsony. It's the opposite of a monopoly. So instead of one seller, you have one dominant buyer. And you know what? That buyer holds all the cards when it comes to setting the price.
And here's exactly why India is that monopsonist. Every single one of Nepal's high-voltage power lines that crosses a border ends in India. So if Nepal wants to sell power to, let's say, Bangladesh, it has to use India's grid to get there. This gives New Delhi an effective veto on who Nepal can sell to.
Now, a lot of people point to the Bhutan model as a potential solution. But that comparison is, well, it's flawed. Sure, Bhutan gets price stability because of its government-to-government deals, but it gives up a ton of strategic autonomy to get it. The key difference is right here. Bhutan is locked in by a contract. Nepal is locked in by infrastructure. At the end of the day, both paths lead to dependency.
This complete focus on exports has created a huge strategic blind spot, the chronic underdevelopment of Nepal's own domestic market. A strong home market could be the perfect buffer, absorbing surplus power at stable prices.
Just look at this data. It's pretty stark. Nepal's per capita electricity consumption is a mere 351 kilowatt hours. I mean, that's just a tiny fraction of the world average, and it's way below its neighbors. The problem isn't a lack of power anymore. It's a total failure of infrastructure and policy to get that power to its own people.
And it really comes down to two main things. First, an outdated and inadequate domestic grid. That last mile of wires is basically crumbling. And second, hesitant and inconsistent government policies. The wishy-washy approach to promoting things like electric vehicles just creates a ton of market uncertainty, and it really slows down the creation of what could be a high-value domestic customer base.
So what's the big takeaway here for an investor? The conclusion is pretty clear. The old strategy of just building more and more power plants is now a high-risk, low-return game. The real opportunity, the real alpha, lies somewhere else entirely.
The game has fundamentally changed. Pouring more capital into these run-of-river projects is just an investment in a commodity whose price Nepal has zero control over. The superior returns, the real money, will be found in solving the very bottlenecks that created this pricing trap in the first place.
And that opportunity rests on three key pillars. First, energy storage, which is all about creating pricing power. Second, grid modernization, which builds a reliable internal market. And third, demand creation, which builds a captive customer base right at home.
Energy storage, especially pump storage hydro, is the ultimate game changer. Think of it like this. You use that cheap monsoon power to pump water uphill to a big reservoir. Then you release it back downhill to generate high-value electricity during peak hours when prices are high. It lets Nepal act like a giant battery, transforming it from a simple price taker into a sophisticated energy banker.
The other two pillars go hand in hand. Investing in a modern smart grid and building out platforms like nationwide EV fast charging networks. That's how you create a reliable, high-value domestic market. A market that can absorb surplus power at stable prices, which reduces that desperate reliance on the volatile export market.
And ultimately, this is what it all boils down to. The risk profile is completely inverted. The challenge isn't about generating power anymore, it's about managing its value. The next big fortunes in Nepal's energy sector won't be made by simply building another power plant. No, they'll be made by the people who build the batteries, the smart grids, and the new industries that finally put Nepal in control of its own energy destiny.